First of all, thank you all for coming. Now, in addition to being the director for Henderson Rowe, I'm also a university professor. There's something I have to tell you about that job. It is one of the very best jobs in the world in that you are right 100% of the time because you write the exam. I've also served as a chief economist, and that's a pretty good job as well, but in a slightly different way. It is one of the few jobs, maybe the only job, where if you're borderline 50% right, like a coin toss, you can still collect a paycheck. So with that as your warning, take everything I say today with a grain of salt, maybe a lot of Tabasco sauce. So I know there's an actual war going on. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the one thing we have forgotten because there's an actual war going on. It's the trade war. And I'm going to tie it in with AI. And I have to do that. It's a bit of a stretch. But I don't get invited to give talks unless there's AI in my title. So there'll be an angle there. And it'll be a surprising one. Because I don't know very much about the technology behind AI. But what I do know is the long-term impact, especially around debt and deficit for governments. It's not a new movie. It's a movie we've seen many times again. I'm going to give you the director's cut version this time. And I'm going to start with the trade war. Now, this is a hot topic last year. And the way you heard about it is that the world buys from China and China doesn't buy from the world. And it's a very unfair trade, right? That's at the crux of kind of the American dismay with China and the start of the trade war. I'll give you a different narrative. There's no trade with China, if you think about it. Right? In trade, from Econ 101, China is supposed to raise chickens and produce eggs. Right? Americans raise cows and produce milk. And Chinese are supposed to buy some milk, and Americans buy some eggs, and we all have a more diversified breakfast. Now, Chinese haven't bought milk. Maybe they're lactose intolerant. But that's not really the reason. It's because the Chinese raise the chickens and the cows and produce the milk and the eggs and ship it to Americans for digital currency. That's not a trade. What is that? That's payroll. America does not trade with China, nor does the UK. Anyone who's in the import-export business, all we do is we hire Chinese factories to make our products, right? Nike is not a Chinese product, it's an American product. Apple, on which the Chinese factory makes $8 per phone, and Apple, the company, makes $250 a phone, right? That's an American product. So there's no trade, and there's therefore no trade deficit. I'll show you a graph. This will be interesting. This is the US trade deficit. It's the scary boogeyman, right? You talk about worsening American trade deficit. 30 years ago, US trade deficit against China was $100 billion. Today, it's about $1 trillion. And of course, it's easy to tell a narrative like America, through trading, through globalization, has become poor and poor and poor, and thus there's a large government debt. But that can't possibly be true because this graph is the aggregate American household wealth. 30 years ago, it was $17 trillion, 17. Today, it's $170 trillion. It's gone up 10 times. You're all businessmen in this room, right? If your payroll has increased 10x, what must be true? Your profits must have gone up. You're selling more, right? So China, the outsourcing of work to China The more we outsource, the more payroll we pay to Chinese factories. It's because we're selling more goods at a better margin globally. So looking at just a trade deficit misses the point, where you think it's a process of Asia becoming wealthy and the West becoming poor. No. Asia is doing the work. The rise of Asia, you're making more payroll to your workers because you're making goods cheaper, sometimes better, and you're just selling more stuff. And so this is how you get rising trade deficit with a multiplier effect on your national wealth. So there's really no problem, nothing to complain about. Except, of course, if you are a worker, your wage has not moved in real terms the last 30 years. Well, that's probably less relevant for you. This is relevant for you. Right? Most of your portfolios probably have lots of S&P 500 companies in them, the Apples, the Googles, the Amazons. It's a relentless growth in corporate earnings. The pie has gotten bigger. The 30 years where Asia entered WTO and did a lot more work. The pie's gotten bigger, and it's disproportionately captured by who? American companies. That's the source of that relentless earnings growth. That pie just hasn't gone very much to the labor force. Again, we're going to come back to how that matters for the AI economy. So this whole business about trade, it is not a prosperity problem because there's more prosperity to go around. It is a social problem because that prosperity hasn't been shared as equally as some would like. I don't know what your view about this man is, Elon Musk, but what I think most of us would agree is if you have a for-profit problem to be solved, this is the man for you. Remember, he sort of got Trump elected on the promise of Doge, right? He's going to improve government efficiency. And you threw Elon Musk at that problem. You figure if anyone can fix that problem, he can fix that problem. He failed miserably. I'm going to toss out a hypothesis. Anything that Elon can't fix probably isn't a problem to start with. Let me introduce the other guy. On the other side of my slide is Franklin D. Roosevelt. Best known, he led the country through World War II, but best known for creating the welfare system in the US. Famously known for getting people to move brick from the left side of a courtyard to the right side and then having another team of men to move it back overnight. What was the issue he was dealing with? He had young men returning from war, unemployable. Makes sense, right? Like if the only line on your resume is killing people and blowing stuff up, you're not very employable, but you're also a high risk to society if you're not employed. Birth of welfare. What is the problem we're trying to solve in the US? Is it a for-profit problem? No, this guy's very good at solving that, right? I mean, his SpaceX is about to go IPO, and it's going to be the 8th largest company instantly, right? It's probably, not very profitable just yet, but already the 8th biggest. And that guy on the other side solves the other kind of problem, the not-for-profit problem. And given the data I've shared with you so far, I hope you get the sense that what America, and really by and large what the West is grappling with, is less of a prosperity issue, but a sharing issue. So I'll give you a personal story. I was an immigrant. I moved to the US when I was 10 from Taiwan. And back then, and that's a very long time ago, I don't want to date myself, but it was a very, very long time ago, they said they were going to build a express railway going from LA to San Francisco. Makes perfect sense, right? It's just a lot of traffic flying back and forth, driving, very environmentally unfriendly. We spent $20 billion and counting. We've not built a mile of rail in California. And you go, this is a failure of government and government bureaucracy. You would be right, but partially right. Because imagine, right? If California actually wanted to build rail, where would the jobs actually go to? Because us Californians, we do not know how to build rail. We would have to bid, and the Japanese, the Germans, and the Chinese would bid, and it'll create jobs for them, right? If we want to spend money on Californians, what we do is we create commissions after commissions, and every city has their council meeting and their own version of environmental impact, and 40 years later, $20 billion later, lots of government employment has been created, government money spent on Californians, and you really don't have to build rail, right? That just is messy and difficult. And so if you look at US versus China, and we like to compare them, and it's really the wrong comparison. US government spends about 30%, a third of the GDP is spent by the US government, and it's mostly welfare. And frankly, some of our military is welfare as well, because there are young men who struggle to find jobs. They come from the poorest part of America, and the best career prospect was to join the military, right? So you can say it, 70 to 80% of the US government spending is welfare. And that maybe is the right amount. China can't do that, right? Because China is still a country that's emerging. There's still a lot of poverty that needs solving. So it requires the government to spend on infrastructure. So much of China is capex. And there's no right or wrong. It is age appropriate. If you're a mature Western government, age appropriate spending is maybe more welfare. China, we still need the government to build roads and dams, so capex makes more sense. And now, circling back, AI. It's the same movie. We are going to create an insane amount of prosperity with AI automation. Think of it. What is AI? Like if you purely abstract away from robots and Terminators, right? When we have AI robots take our jobs or have them do our jobs, how is that different than having very talented, well-educated Chinese do our manufacturing jobs? Indians do our coding jobs. It's just outsourcing to a cheaper, lower cost way of producing. And the result of that is massive increase in productivity and prosperity. But most of that pie will go where? It'll go to capital. Because capital pay for it. All innovation is owned by capital. It's the unfortunate, and maybe it's the lucky truth for this room. Right? You pay for the innovation, you get to capture most of the rent. Labor. So I know whenever we economists talk about new innovation, and people go, oh, that's going to take jobs away. And we go, no. Schumpeter, creative destruction, more jobs will be created. That's only true if you're in Econ 101. Right? When you go take Econ 201 and 301 and do a PhD level research, that's actually just not true. Now, first of all, the new jobs created are just not jobs for the guy who just got fired. Right? So he's still screwed. But it's also highly data dependent, right? We look at the front end of this graph, and if you can't read the legend, it doesn't matter, right? This just says, relentless job creation in the US. And then it peaked about 30 years ago. Right? So more automation, more outsourcing, it's come down. So jobs aren't always, so the data you want to look at is not unemployment. The data you want to look at is what we call labor participation. US has peaked, and now its labor participation has declined closer back to about 30%, 60%, meaning, we went from 70% of all people who are able to work are working to now only 60%. There's a 10% gap. So a 10% increase of people who can never actually work. And what do? This is government employment, a relentless increase in government employment. Okay? And that's not enough. There's a relentless increase in government expenditure, and in the US, that's mostly welfare. It is solving a social problem. The US government is not in the business of solving a prosperity problem, because the capitalist in the US has got that one covered. So once you understand that, AI will both create the largest return to capital for all of you who have a portfolio that's bought AI-related growth. And I'm sure other companies will find ways to use that to increase productivity and profitability. Okay? So that's the good news. And on the other end, maybe slightly scary news, but my point today is don't be scared by it, is let's just use US government debt because we all know that number. The $40 trillion the US owes today, it'll go to 100. It can't and it won't and it doesn't have to be paid back. I know that's kind of weird because the aggregate US household wealth will go from 170 trillion to 350 trillion. And you just have a constant debt ratio. Like any healthy company, you have a constant gearing ratio. It's just a way of leveraging up your productivity. So for those of you who go, America's printing way too much and that's dangerous, that's going to crater the currency, that is going to make its debt worthless, you're learning too much of your economics from the internet. That is not a risk. Yes, the dollar will be worth less, but so will all the Western currencies, right? Because they're using printing of the money to solve a social problem. So I tend to think of anyone who buys American debt as, thank you, you're subsidizing American social problem. So good for you. Yeah, you're like American taxpayer, except you don't know you're an American taxpayer. Right? And I mean, inflation is a beautiful way of taxing wealth, right? And it's taxing everyone else's wealth because so many people hold their wealth in dollar-based assets. And it's a great way. So US has the cheapest way of solving their social problem versus the rest of the world. So people are going to say, didn't we learn in Econ 101? Again, that's just a bad place to learn many things. Like if you print money, you become the German, the Weimar Republic, or Argentina. Well, let's think about the Weimar Republic, right? How did the Weimar Republic go kaput? People go, oh, irresponsible central bank printed a lot of money. No, they fought the rest of the world twice and lost, right? On the backdrop of that, doesn't matter what you do on the monetary policy perspective, you're going to have a problem. What about Argentina? Well, Argentina decided to skip the first phase of any productive economy, right? You're supposed to work and export for the world and build up a reserve, right? The Americans, after World War II, was the world's factory. It worked for 20 years to build a massive reserve before it became a consumer-led economy. Argentina just decided to skip that step and just become a consumer-led economy and just print the money and spend. And you're not surprised, their economy went to shit. So those are not lessons that are relevant by and large for most developed Western countries. So a little bit of printing to a lot of printing, depending on how quickly AI brings in new cash flow, is not going to be that bad. And that is really the bulk of my talk. I have some implications I'll run through very quickly, and then we can get on with the eating, right? So yes, de-dollarization, and that all started when the US started weaponizing the dollar, meaning, yes, the US will never default on you. That is true. We just have a better form of defaulting on you by saying you are part of the axis of evil, so your dollar doesn't work anymore, right? It's like selective default. Right? And so once the world realized that is possible, they go, okay, maybe it's not a good idea to hold my entire government reserve in the dollar. So the central banking de-dollarization moving into gold is really triggered by that. Right? And also you realize if you're just holding dollar assets, you're subsidizing American social problems. Yeah, probably it's not a problem you should be subsidizing. So just after this recent bout of, maybe gold pulling back, we might actually see buying coming back again once Middle East is exporting, once trade goes back into proper orders, a lot of the new reserve being earned will still largely be in gold rather than dollars. And so again, holding just pure US debt is not going to have a default risk, but you're just getting a lot less interest than you should. Implication 2, I said this many times, I'll say it again because it's relevant for people in this room. Capital is going to be a big winner from AI, just like capital was a big winner from trade. Because it's the same thing, right? When we discover trade, or when we discover the Asians will do all the work for free, nearly, capital won big, right? Like, it wasn't emerging markets that did incredibly well. It was American companies that did incredibly well because they capture all the margin. AI, it's the same thing for the big companies with brand. You just now have a cheaper way of producing all the goods and services you were selling. Margin is going to improve massively, again, captured by capital. So if you have a growth-oriented portfolio with Henderson Rowe, congratulations, that'll continue to do well. And that pendulum swinging back, we keep on saying, labor's been so screwed, pendulum's got to swing back the other way. No, because labor isn't the one funding the research and innovation, right? That's why AI is invented not to replace management and owner, right? This is the only reason I'm still employed is I didn't pay for an AI to replace myself. I pay for an AI to replace someone else. Yeah, this is kind of unfair, but it's how it works, right? So unfortunately, labor will struggle, and that's the government's job to get that fixed. Implication number 3, I'll selectively pick on India. I apologize, but there are many other bullet points. So India was in the waiting, right? It was going to be the next China. And usually when the biggest manufacturer crosses a per capita GDP of 13,000, American companies start to move factories. This time, India's like, yes, China just crossed 13,000, it's our turn. But before factories are able to move, there's autonomous robots, soon to be matched with AI. So I think the only people who can kind of outwork the Chinese at a lower cost are probably Elon's AI robots. And that trade is not going the way of India. So when we bring jobs back to the US, when we bring jobs back to the UK, it'll be bringing jobs back to American robots, British robots. And again, those robots are owned by capital. Capital used to own labor, but then we banned slavery, right? So that sort of doesn't work. Hey, we're bringing that back again. You can now own labor, just in robot labor. So India is going to get screwed. Asia in the first phase of it, because the first phase, just like the first phase of the internet, you probably didn't know, the first phase of the internet covering 2000 2010, Asian hardware manufacturers outperformed NASDAQ by 10% per year, every year. The world just have to get wired up first before all software will work. You're probably going to see the same thing. We're going to rewire the entire world for AI deployment, and Asia is still king in terms of hardware. And then the last bit, all of us, if you do a hard technical work as a profession, that's going to be replaced. But what won't be replaced is you cannot sue a robot. So if you still are the person who signs on the dotted line, so you have legal liability, like you could be a doctor without knowing medicine. As long as you've taken the exam, so you can be sued by your patient, the robots might do everything else, but you can capture all the margin. So if you're fiduciary, if somewhere you got to sign and you can be sued, you're going to be perfectly fine. So that's the end of my talk. I know Emma says we leave the Q&A for after we start eating, so I'm going to respect her wishes and bow goodbye and thank you to everyone.